Hello, Professor, and everyone. My name is Kumar Lohano, and I'm going to be talking about the climatic drivers. We're going to be analyzing them to find out what drive dengue fever cases the most in Singapore. So, what are dengue fever cases? So, firstly, it's a disease, a viral disease that's caused by the female Aedes mosquitoes. What happens is that when they bite you and suck your blood, they transmit a virus inside your bloodstream, and this leads to dengue fever amongst humans. And it's a deadly disease. It leads to many deaths each year and many people going sick. So now we know that how dengue fever is caused. It depends mostly on the mosquitoes and how they live and how they breed and how they grow. And they are mostly connected to the climate, so temperature, rainfall, and so on. And because of that, there are going to be some data science questions that I have, and I'm going to be answering those today. First of all, in the long term, how do dengue cases look like? Secondly, when do dengue cases peak each year? Thirdly, what variables are actually causing dengue? What climatic variables, and how are they linked with them? And the reason why this matters is because if we look at each year, thousands, if not millions, are infected by this disease. And this leads to hundreds, if not thousands, of deaths each year. So, by finding out what causes dengue fever, we can avoid this disease, we can avoid the lives lost each year, we can enable warning systems early, and we can also support hospital bed capacity planning and policy making. So, sit back because now we're going to be diving deeper. So, with that being said, let's begin. First of all, the data sets that were used for this were first of all the World Bank's population data, Open Dengue's dengue fever cases, and thirdly, ERA 5's climatic variables such as temperature, average, minimum, maximum, the wind speeds, and also the total precipitation. Now, why did I select Singapore and why specifically it's weekly data? Because first of all, it's a tropical area and island, so it has a lot of forests and it has the perfect weather for it. Secondly, a lot of dengue cases and consistent dengue cases have been there since the past 23 years. And thirdly, it is one of those only few countries with continuous 20 plus years data and with high quantities and number of dengue cases. So if you look at the weekly temperature and the wind speed, they all have a seasonal variation and they're quite stable. Same goes for precipitation, and the population has been continuously increasing. They have a sort of a cyclic relation over here. Firstly, so that means that dengue is seasonal, so it's connected to climatic variables like temperature and so on. Secondly, the major epidemic years were 2005, 13, 14, 16, 19, 20, and 22. And thirdly, using the sliding window where we take the average of 52 weeks continuously from week 1 to 52, 2 to 53, and so on till the last week, we find out that there are multi-year cycles present of higher and lower risks. Now, what was the process? So combining the data, loading that up, cleaning it, and then I performed ED on it to find out temporal patterns, to quantify relationships, and I also performed feature engineering. The challenges that were faced in this was data that was missing from 1st July till 29 December of 2018. Secondly, the analysis varies from country to country and area to area and neighborhood to neighborhood. So each country has its own immune system, its economy, drainage systems, and so on. There are a lot of confounding factors like awareness campaigns, vector control intensity, and so on. And lastly, all the features that we're going to study today are almost all of them going to be nonlinear and lab. So what that means, we're going to look into that. But first, let's address the elephant in the room, the results. So through graphs such as average dengue cases by each week and by each month of the year, we find out that they are the lowest in February and March, and they are the highest from May to September, October-ish. And we get to find out that these are some of those important months where people should take care and be aware of mosquitoes and other cases. Secondly, the patterns they match. What do I mean by that? If we see a rise in dengue cases over here, that also we also see a rise in temperature and we also see a rise in precipitation. It's not stable. The temperature is not stable all the time, and they rise. And likewise for precipitation in dengue cases. So that means there is some sort of relationship present that we have to find out. Secondly, dengue cases never get to zero. So that suggests that mosquitoes can live in Singapore for the entire year. So that means this suggests that Singapore has the ideal scenario. It's like the ideal land for mosquitoes to live. And we see monsoon seasons and all that. So that actually causes a rise. So that explains when the temperature and the precipitation levels rise. The number of dengue cases also rise. Now, what does correlation point out? We find out that population, average temperature, minimum temperature, and the wind speed. However, we cannot just account for simple correlation and a correlation heat map because we should not forget correlation does not mean causation. Just because you eat more butter does not mean that you have higher chances of divorces. Just because you eat more cheese does not mean that you have higher chances of dying by becoming entangled in your bedsheet. Or just because the US produces more oil does not mean that your favorite rock music quality is going to be higher. So this isn't enough. We are going to have to dive even deeper. So before that, we have to understand the mosquito's breeding cycle. The mosquitoes lay eggs. Then, after a few days or months, according to the water levels, it converts the larvae hatch out. Then those larvae grow up into pupae, and those pupae then turn into mosquitoes. Then what happens is that that certain mosquito goes around and bites a certain person infected with the dengue virus. Then that dengue virus is inside the mosquito, and the mosquito is traveling around. So that mosquito then goes around and bites other people and transmits that dengue virus inside those people, and this leads to the dengue fever cases spreading around and the epidemics. Now, we're going to understand the concept of lag. What that means is that just because there's a time delay between cause and effect. Now, what that means, just because you perform poorly on your exams right now does not mean that you're going to see the effects today. You can see them in a month later on your GPA, semester GPA, or after 4 years on your entire CGPA when you graduate, or maybe even when you apply for your master's. So the same applies over here. Just because we see a rise in dengue cases right now, that does not mean that it was because of the temperature and the rainfall now. It could have been a few months before, and that explains and correlates with the breeding cycle and further explains it. Now, it's time to pay attention to the meat pie. Firstly, lagged correlation. So when we look into that, when we perform lag correlation, we find out that usually from 6 to 12 weeks, that is where those variables such as temperature and precipitation have the highest effect on dengue cases. And that actually makes sense because of the breeding cycle. So most of these variables are actually causing a correlation, and this relationship is present due to a lag from few weeks, like 6 to 12 weeks before. And then we applied feature engineering. Feature engineering is where we create new input features from raw data. I was able to create 123 new variables from just 15. And through that, we find out that it's mostly the previous week's dengue cases that are actually contributing to dengue cases. And that actually makes sense because the more the dengue cases in population means more venues for viruses, and that means more chances for mosquitoes to transmit to humans. And lagged weather variables also show moderate correlations, not very high. But this is how we find out that, okay, the past dengue cases are actually, actually really important and are contributing to the transmission chain. Additionally, this is supplementary. I also tried applying machine learning models like random forest and XGBoost, and through that we find out similar values, similar variables, or almost similar. But however, if we look at the actual and the predictions, there is a huge difference in the basic features where we did not apply feature engineering, and in the last one over here, XG boosting, there's a sort of a shift. Now that shift usually implies overfitting, and when I tried this new metric of mine, which is direction, this is essentially telling me that half of the times the machine learning model predicted in the wrong direction, and therefore that's why this machine learning idea, I dropped it, and it's in the appendix in the supplementary material. So the conclusions are that dengue fever cases are mostly, they peak around May to October. Secondly, lag temperatures and wind speeds and precipitations from 6 to 12 weeks ago, they have higher positive correlations with dengue fever cases, and this actually builds on top of the breeding cycle of the dengue virus and the mosquitoes. Precipitation does not have a huge impact in Singapore, and this contradicts other countries' results. And this could be because Singapore is an island and it has already many breeding sites present, or they have a really good drainage system. And lastly, the past dengue activities and the lag temperature related features are consistently among the most important predictors for this. In future, what we can do is that we can try repeating this for other countries and try to generalize it. However, there's so many confounding factors, which also includes social media coverage to see whether awareness has been created or not. We can try deep learning methods like LSTMs, LLMs, and GRUs. However, they are a black box. They only forecast, but they won't tell you which predictor variables and which features are actually the most important. We can try incorporating subsidy spatial data. Currently, I just incorporated the entire country. So we can incorporate neighborhood level cases, whether those spaces were more green, because that leads to more mosquito breeding sites and so on. And we can try creating stronger features and pipeline for the machine learning models. However, that's the equivalent of a research paper, and it is out of the scope for COMP2501. So yeah, this is something that can be done in the future. These are the references, and thank you so much for